Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to what is, funnily enough, my first ever actual video on this channel, or at least proper content video. My name's CorusCreative, and today I want to talk a little bit about my favourite types of animation styles used in both film and television. Though I should just say that in this episode, I'm not going to be including video games as such, because I think that would be more of a different topic, and generally speaking, most games have a tendency to follow one or two different animation styles. So instead, I think I'll come back to them another day for something more games focused. Now, from doing some research, I found 12 different types of animations which are in current use. Some of you will have heard of them, and others you may not have done. But don't worry too much, as personally I'm going to be ranking the 5 most common types typically used, which are 2D animation, which I guess you could call analog, as the next one is 2D digital, 3D digital and CGI animation, stop motion, and finally, claymation. Each of these animation types have created some incredible pieces of work made by so many different talented people. And honestly, I pretty much love all of them, so even if you disagree with my list, you can take it with a pinch of salt, as it was hard enough to choose between them even at this reduced level. So first up for me would be stop motion animation. To explain what this animation style is that it's essentially the method of using an object or subject by taking a single photo of it and altering the position of the subject in between frames ever so slightly to eventually create the illusion of live movement. Typically, these kinds of animations are run at 24 frames per second, which means it takes roughly 1500 frames to generate just 1 minute of footage and roughly 87,000 frames for a full hour. You've got to have some serious determination to maintain the attention to detail that this demands. I couldn't stand to have to take the same photo 5 times when it only accounts for 1 frame in the grand scheme of things. Somewhere you might have seen this type of animation is in original LEGO films. A few good examples of this that I've seen were by creators such as Blunty 3000 and Beyond the Brick. Both creators have made a great effort into some really detailed videos, which are animated incredibly well. And it's worth noting that in each of them, the characters are interacting with scenery that has to be built into a full set that they can move around in smoothly. Something which really impressed me is how customizable the different elements of the scenes are, especially when you think how blocky LEGO is in the first place. More relevant to the whole film and TV thing I mentioned before, yeah, glazing over the fact that I've been off topic already. Stop motion has been seen in a lot of shows like South Park in its earlier years before it was transferred over to computer generation, and secondly, Robot Chicken, created by Seth Green on Adult Swim. Technically, the TV series and films of Wallace and Gromit are both listed as stop motion, but the characters were clay models built on a wireframe, so I figured that these characters fit more into the claymation category rather than stop motion. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. Second up in my list is claymation itself. It's an animation style which, interestingly, seems to me to have picked up more of a following recently, with Leica Studios producing films like Kubo and the Two Strings, Missing Link, and Paranorman. I came across this style through a couple of Tim Burton movies, which were Corpse Bride and The Nightmare Before Christmas. All of these are incredibly creative movies for the insane amount of detail that they put into designing the characters, creating their individual costumes, set design, and ingenuity when it comes to creating each set piece by hand. Every prop you see is completely custom made by the artists. It's just something that really resonates with me from a creative perspective, being an engineer in real life. The sheer effort that goes into these films is simply ridiculous, and I personally love the handmade feel from these films that you get when you watch them. Interestingly enough, going back to the Wallace and Gromit point from earlier, if you look closely at the characters in certain shots, you can just about make out the texture of the artist's thumb and forefinger prints on the surface of the models used. Can you imagine having to re-sculpt the characters in between shots? I'd be terrified to get it wrong, just because of how long it would then take to correct it. I've often wondered if the heat from the studio lights are able to cause the characters to deform in any way. I mean, for as long as it takes to get a scene, those characters can be under the lights for hours on end. If they're using different types of halogens, depending on the temperature, I imagine it could cause some filming problems. Confusingly, this animation style does overlap with stop motion, as even though the characters are made in a different manner and their joints can bend rather than have to be replaced, the filming is still done using image stills incrementally to create movement. So I guess the main difference is the type of craft that is used to create the scenery and characters themselves. Maybe don't quote me on that, as I'm not exactly an expert. Overall, I like this style a lot, and I'd actually like to see more films come out of it in the future. Next up for me would be classic reliable old 2D animation. Yes, the very same kind that a lot of us were introduced to at a very young age. Am I showing my age a little too much? This is what I would call the original animation, the process of drawing by hand an individual frame and then using a light box to map and trace the next frame of motion by using the previous drawing as a reference point. This is the same animation style that produced a lot of my favourite Disney movies, including The Fox and the Hound, Peter Pan, Dumbo, and 101 Dalmatians. all of which were drawn painstakingly frame by frame into feature-length films which have arguably become iconic in their own right. If not only the stories they tell, but for the characters that they created which were universally loved. Just look at Pongo, for example. How can you not love a good boy like that? I like the style based on its back-to-basics feel. I also really love how, knowing that each frame is hand-drawn, the artists managed to keep the character's design absolutely consistent throughout the film. I also like the level of fluidity they managed to get into the motion of the characters, everything from facial expressions down to walking and running cycles. I think a couple of great examples of this film that did this were Oliver and Company and All Dogs Go to Heaven. Films which have a lot of faster motion cycles and older characters with more droopy features that would generally move more in between each frame. Just look at Francis, the English Bulldog. His face has a lot of natural skin folds which move over each other in each frame used. The artist would have had to have had a great understanding of that level of motion to make it not only smooth, but believable, in that we could actually imagine it being the same in real life. I think this animation type has inspired a lot of people to try their own hand at it at home, and a lot of artists have started out by using the same drawing techniques that the animators would have done as well, whether it's simply a stay-at-home hobby or a profession later on. I admit that on a few occasions I've been motivated enough to pick up a pen and pencil because of films like these. I guess that overall though, my favourite thing about this animation style is the expressiveness and ease with which the characters move. It's got a toony and exaggerated feel that does so well to tell you how the characters are responding and feeling at any given moment. That's not to say that the others already mentioned don't do this. In fact, they do it really well in their own way, but I just find that this animation type is generally more expressive. And maybe I'm a bit biased, but that's debatable. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Anyways, moving on. Now we're down to the final two animation styles, and only one could be my personal favourite number one. So, coming runner-up, in my opinion of course, just want to be clear, it's not subjective fact by any means, would be 3D digital or CGI animation. This style has revolutionised the way we look at films in the last 20 years or so, and marked improvements seem to happen year on year, without us ever really even noticing. I mean, think about it. How many times recently have you gone back to an old film CGI and thought how dated the film looked based upon the definition of the characters and the graphics being used? Now, it's true that there are loads of animated films that have stood up to time really well, like Toy Story, where we don't mind knowing that we're essentially meant to be looking at plastic characters where their textures aren't as complex as human skin, for instance. But even so, I like to think that films like Avatar, Transformers, Rango, or The Adventures of Tintin wouldn't have been possible with the same technology from 1995. It's a real testament, I think, to the progression of technology, as well as our own adaptation to new techniques as people, that have really pushed the boundaries on CGI's applications into films. It's fair enough, I think, to say that technologically, of course, Avengers Endgame was a masterpiece, and that's before you dive in on the actors' performances, the set design, original score, or anything else. And maybe I'll do another video on that another time. Let me know if that's something you'd potentially like. I'm building a to-do list already. Getting back on track, I really have to stop getting distracted. I like this animation style for its precise ability to calculate certain movements of the character between poses, as well as the noted skill it takes to be mindful of each individual part of a character as they move. In 2D, for instance, if you can't see an arm or part of a leg, that's fine, because it doesn't technically exist anymore. Hence, it can be temporarily forgotten about while other frames are drawn. Whereas in CGI, you have to remember where every part of the character is to make the movements look more believable. In Zootopia, for instance, the character designers had to be mindful which species they were working on, and figure out how each character might move based on their size, shape, and general posture in an upright manner. Being of course that all the animals are, anthropomorphic in this film. That's got to take some head scratching for sure. I know I could go into more detail on this animation technique, because there is so much to talk about it, but truly it's a seriously expansive topic in its own right. But I think it's time to move on, as you may have already worked out what my favourite type of animation style is. Yep, it may surprise you, and it may not, but my favourite type of animation had to be 2D digital. Subjectively, I think that this animation style, while it's a lot more simple than CGI, it still generally requires the talent of a 2D artist, much like original 2D animation. But instead, this animation style is achieved using digital art, tablet and stylus in many cases. This animation style has been helped in the past by the introduction of Flash animation software. If anyone's ever been on Newgrounds, for example, you'll know what I mean. Television shows usually aimed at kids are generally animated in this fashion. For example, Fairly Odd Parents, Bluey, My Little Pony, Invader Zim, Danny Phantom, and The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. The list goes on and on. The style is so popular that there have been more shows being created with a more mature theme that a wider audience can watch, such as Archer, BoJack Horseman, F is for Family, Rick and Morty, Family Guy, Big Mouth, and Paradise PD. Something I really love about animations like these is how relatively accessible it is to get into it in the first place. If you trawl through YouTube for even 2 minutes, you'll find so many hand-drawn 2D digital animations of fan videos of different series or original content that would have taken the creators weeks or months worth of work to make. And with such a wide talent pool of so many different drawing styles to choose from, it becomes ever so clear just how much effort it takes to make animations like this from an amateur's perspective. In this way, I like to think of YouTube as the world's largest display case for art and animation. Imagine being an employer for an animation studio, being able to see a content creator's entire portfolio on their YouTube channel showing potentially years worth of effort and development as they've gotten better over time. Many creators do speed paints and time lapses which show their methods and techniques in more detail. Simply put, this is probably the best style to experiment with. It's largely the most accessible to try and creates real potential, I think, for hobbyists to become professionals in their own right or with a studio. Even better though, it's extensive in the characters it creates and even generates entire universes and plot lines that the viewer can actually interact with and relate to. It really is a style that allows people to become their own storytellers and take advantage of global communities in which to share their creations. Fandoms have been generated from just such memorable shows created through 2D animation, and it's got a special place in my heart because of the opportunity it offers at the same time. So there you have it, my list of the top 5 animation styles. Let me know if you liked it or whether you agreed with or not with my list. I'm sure many of you could teach me more about these styles that maybe I missed in my research. And remember, this is only my opinion, so try not to take it too seriously. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did like what you saw, consider clicking the like button, and if you want to see more lists like these in future, why not subscribe using the button below? I'd love to see any of your suggestions in the future. Last thing before I go, I just want to give a huge shout out to SaikoKitty for all of her help in bringing Chorus to life with all of the character stills that you've seen in this video. Without her help lining and colouring my original sketches, I'm sure that this video wouldn't have been possible. So a huge shout out to her, and I hope you'll all go and show her some love on her Twitter page, which I've linked below. Well, that's it from me, it's over to you. I've been CorusCreative, I hope to see you soon.